What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Murder Unscripted, the podcast that aims to immerse you in the true crime genre like nobody else. I'm your host, Ed Hydock, along with my co-host, my partner in crime, Melissa Spivey.
Hey.
So we have a guest today, and I know we've teased it for the past couple weeks, but today is the day. So we are so proud and so pleased to introduce Edna Cowell Martin. And she has just published a book along with Megan Atkinson called Dark Tide about her cousin Ted Bundy, the life and times. So we are
Yes.
pleased to welcome to the stage Edna Cowell Martin.
Thank you. Thank
Hello,
you for
Edna.
having me.
You are welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. This is like a dream come true.
Oh. Well, I hope I don't disappoint you. So
Oh my
No,
gosh.
you won't.
Did I read that you're in a town called Paulsbo? How do you
yeah,
pronounce it?
you pronounced it right.
Paulsbo?
Yes. Yes. It's just west of Seattle. So you have to take a ferry across Puget Sound and so cross an island. And that's where we are. Used to live in Seattle, but we live out here. It's beautiful.
Is that near? My brother lives out there. They used to live on Bainbridge Island, and now they're in, forgive me if I say this wrong, Squamish?
Yeah, you said it right.
Okay, that's where my brother and his wife live. Are you near there?
Yeah, absolutely. And near
Oh,
Bainbridge Island, too. Bainbridge Island's only 6 miles from here.
oh my gosh. Yeah, that's where they used to live. My brother works. He's the head brewer at Bainbridge Brewery.
Oh,
I
yeah.
always struggle to say that word.
Yeah.
And then my sister-in-law is a chef at Amelia Wynn something or other. I forget what she said.
Oh.
But yeah, they went to culinary school and then they moved out there and they just love it.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that live on Bainbridge Island that commute into the city by ferry. Um, it's a beautiful spot. It kind of gets people away from the city, I think, is why they like it.
Is it strange for you to still be in the kind of area where all this was happening? Like, do you have these haunting memories?
Well, so it's a big area, and I've lived here most of my life off and on, and it's incredible. I mean, if you're into the outdoors, there's so much. So just Ted covered little parts of it, but our world is so much bigger than he is.
Sure.
And so, growing up out on the water, hiking in the mountains, skiing, I mean, there's just so much to do that I try not to think about him too much. Sometimes I go some places and I go, oh my God, and I get a flashback, but most of the time, no.
Sure. I didn't know if some people like just move out of the area or like, I can't be here. I need to move somewhere totally different that doesn't look like it, doesn't feel like it, nothing.
That's what my brother did. He just picked up and said, I got to go.
Mm-hmm. And it
Yeah.
would be hard to blame him.
No, I completely understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I want to start with the $1,000,000 question. So what sparked you and your co-author Megan Atkinson to write a book about your life with Ted after all these years? So why now?
I know 50 years it took me to do this. So it's a really good question. It's a valid question. Um, I think that I really spent most of those 50 years just burying it and hiding from the fact that I was related to him. And honestly, I didn't want anybody to know, so I hid from it. I hid the fact that I was related to him. But it was beginning to really start to nag at me. I knew I had a story to tell and this relationship, and I realized something happens when you turn 70. Maybe it's for other people, but that just, first of all, that's a birthday that kind of blew my mind. And I went, you know what? I don't, COVID kind of helped too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I felt like it was time to get the story out while I still remembered it.
Sure. Very good. Yeah, because I'd seen you been
Yeah.
pseudonymed before in like Anne Rule's book. You were a
Yes, you
Scott.
caught it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we were Jane and Alan Scott.
Did you get to pick your pseudonym or did she?
No, she did it. And it was so funny because that was what ended up in Wikipedia. And
Oh, that's funny.
Oh,
they didn't
wow.
know our family name. And I have to tell you, we were grateful for that pseudonym.
Yeah.
She
Sure.
did us
I'll
a
bet.
big favor. But then when I got to the point where I was coming out with my story, I was interviewed by a reporter for the Seattle Times. And I said, well, actually, Ted came and his mom, and he came from Philadelphia to come live with our family when he was called Teddy then. He's only 4. And I said, he stayed with us. And she said, well, how can I? She needed verification of that because these other names were, the ones that everybody.
Oh.
So she did a lot. She did a lot of fact checking to make sure that I was on the up and up about that.
Yeah.
So I was impressed that she had checked. And how she did it was she went to Ann Rule's daughter and asked her, and
Mm.
she confirmed it.
Interesting.
Yeah, Leslie
Man.
Rule. Hmm.
Wow. Who knew? I had met Anne once at a conference. She was so sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, she's
Very
amazing.
cool.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Let's start at the beginning. So, just for our listeners too who don't know, tell us how you're related to Ted Bundy and walk us through the connection, because I know it might take some setup with the family tree.
Yeah, so I'll do that quickly. My dad was the youngest of 7 kids, and his very oldest sibling was Sam Cowell, who was Ted's mom, Louise,
Hmm.
her dad. So Sam and his wife had 3 girls, and Louise, Ted's mom, was the oldest. And so by the time she had a child, so she was over 20 years. Sam was over 20 years older than my father, his oldest brother. So by the
Wow.
time he had a child, she was almost the same age as my dad. So they became really close friends. So that was the big connection. So they grew up together, knowing each other really well. My parents migrated out from Philadelphia. This is all in the Philadelphia area. You guys know this
We
area.
Yes.
are a stone's throw. We're 20 minutes probably. Oh,
Yep.
well, I would say maybe a little further, maybe a little over 30 to the edge.
So
Yeah.
both my parents grew up in Philadelphia, and they moved. My grandfather actually moved out to Seattle to run a company out here, and one by one, his kids followed him. My mom and my dad moved out, and so Louise had Ted out of wedlock, and back then that was a lot more, frowned upon, or a lot more pressure from society to be an quote unwed mother. And he was starting to become much more aware at age 4. And she was, I think, starting to deal with some issues. And people asking about his father, and all these kinds of things. So my father said, why don't you move out here? You can start over, brand new narrative. You can write it the way you want it, and just begin anew. And that's what she did. She moved in with our family and lived with my mom, my dad, and my brother, who is exactly the same age.
Wow.
2 4-year-olds in the same house.
Oh
Man.
my goodness.
I can just see my mom going crazy. But
Pulling her hair out.
yeah, absolutely. My mother was a very elegant woman, and just we used to call her Lady Eleanor. But anyway,
Oh,
she around 2 4-year-olds. I'm sure that was quite a handful, and very generous of them because they lived with our family for almost 4 years, or excuse me,
Wow.
1 year, 1 year. Sorry, and I was born the following year.
So are John and Ted, they're 5 years older than you?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I loved reading about your parents in the book. I loved reading about how your mom didn't like to wear her gun because she didn't think it went with her outfit. I was cracking up.
That's one of my favorite little pieces in there.
I loved that, and how, like, I just thought that was so funny. And you talking about, especially your dad, towards the end when you were talking about how he gave, like, the greatest gifts. Like, he was such a good gift giver, and he made bows and all this, and that was one of the parts I started tearing up at because I just was like, "That's
Aw.
so beautiful." Like, that's such a nice thing
she
for you
texted
to
me that she's
remember.
crying reading your
Yeah,
book. And I'm
that's
like, what is it?
it's sentimental. And and that's the scene of the kite flying, with the gift of the ribbon. And I won't go into the details right
Yeah.
now because that's but it did cause explosive results. So
Wow.
Yeah, that was hilarious. I laughed out loud at that part.
so you know the story obviously is from our point of view. And our family is so much bigger than just Ted. And so you're going to hear there's a lot of other things, obviously, in the book about us. And I'm married to a crazy man and been with him for almost 48 years.
They're the best kind.
Over 48 years. And he's a nut. He's whacked out and he makes me die laughing even to this date. So a bit of humor does come out every once in a while in the book, yes.
I told Ed, I was like, "I'm obsessed with Don. I love him. I love
Everybody
him.
is.
He's so funny."
He's hysterical. I mean, he continues to be hysterical too. And that really was part of it. You know, humor can get you through a lot of things
Hmm.
because there were really some very, very tense and difficult times. And thank God for him, because if I hadn't had him, I'm so glad I met him before all this stuff happened with Ted, because I think it would have been difficult to trust anybody.
Yeah, I thought that was really special that he kinda knew you before, and he knew Ted, so he knew what you knew before everything.
That's right.
Yeah.
He
Wow.
did. He was around Ted quite a bit as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild.
So so if you were 6 years younger, at what age did you really start hanging out with Ted? So go back to your childhood.
Yeah. You know, he was always one of the big kids. And we had a cabin out on what we called Lower Puget Sound at that time. So up here on where Bainbridge Island is, it's the upper part of Puget Sound. And Puget Sound is a long, you know, inlet. I don't know what they call it these days, the actual technical term for it. But it so we were further south of here, and it was on the water, and that their family would come out frequently for picnics and activities. But then we started traveling, so there'd be times when we wouldn't see them. And then at one point when I was 14, we moved to Arkansas, which was such a completely different world.
Yes, definitely.
The Ozark Mountains, when my father took that position as chairman of the music department. But it's an incredibly beautiful place. And it opened my eyes to a lot of things I wasn't completely aware of in other parts of the country. Incredible bluegrass music and all kinds of stuff like that. So when I finally moved back to Washington to finish up my junior and senior year, that's when Ted and I became really close.
So hold that thought. We kind of like to do this chronologically just to
Yeah.
kind of we'll walk through the case. So describe for me Ted's looks, his personality when he was younger, because I imagine he was very different than the man that he became.
Yeah, he was a real sweet kid, and I always thought that I really liked him because he was always really nice to me. You know, he was one of the big kids, so I mean, 5 years is a big difference when you're little. And so he hung out with my brother a lot, and so they would do stuff together, and I would often end up playing with the younger kids. But I always felt like he saw me. You know, he would come over, and when the family would come over, he would always make a point of saying hi to me, and he really had a lot of affection for me. He always did. And so that's my main memories of him growing up, is just this really nice kid, which leads to further reason why I was so shocked to find out that he wasn't like I thought he was.
I know you said you would kinda look for crabs and other stuff on the beach, so what else did you guys do together?
Yeah, tons of stuff, because when you have a cabin on a beach, yeah, we had a whole beach full of oysters, so we could go down and shuck the
Wow.
oysters and make stew, and we would dig up clams, of course. And of course, we loved the little sand crabs that were running around, and it was fun to scare the younger kids with them.
That's
We had
hilarious.
three boats, so we had one that
Wow.
was just a rowboat that we could explore in, and then another one with a little engine on it, and then a big speedboat, because I was absolutely obsessed with water skiing. I learned to water ski when I was 8,
Is that just
and
something that when you're out there, you
on the
do
water.
because the water sports are so big out there?
Yeah, I mean, when I moved to Arkansas, it was a lot warmer, so it was a lot more comfortable to be on the water there, because Puget Sound is chilly. But
Mhm.
we lived on a bay, so it was a little bit warmer. I did everything on the water. I just there were some kids down the bay that were water skiing, and at 8 years old, I walked up to them and asked them if they would show me how to do it, and they did, and I took to it and loved it.
Perfect. Because I can guarantee you in Pennsylvania, I've never heard someone say, "I'm good at water skiing." It just doesn't happen here. We don't
Now,
have
Yeah.
that.
just as an aside, my dad was a good water skier too, and he grew up in Pennsylvania, but
Really?
he didn't learn in Pennsylvania. It was in visiting some people for the summer in upstate New York, which is
Oh,
where
very cool.
yeah.
So what is one of your, or can you tell us about any of like your favorite memories when you were a kid with John and Ted?
Like, do you have is there a moment that stands out to you that like I will never forget
Mm.
doing this?
I think that it was just hanging out and doing fun stuff and having picnics together and ending up out on the water together and doing things. I mean, there's a scene in the book where again it's a water skiing theme where a friend of ours, good friend of mine, Clark and my brothers, he was pulling a water skier and they were out in the boat. I guess that's why I included it because whereas we thought it was really awesome that the skier came and swamped, she was an accomplished slalom skier. And so when she came and skied by John and Ted in this rowboat, she leaned over and completely sent a cascade of water into the boat. So that's
Mhm.
my favorite scene because my brother thought it was a big compliment, and Ted was absolutely outraged and
Yeah.
So even as a kid, he had exhibited those. Because there's a scene I
yeah,
want to talk about later, but as a kid, it's interesting to hear that he was embarrassed or
yeah, he was it really upset him.
hmm,
He liked everything kind of in its place, and he didn't know these people. Maybe he was scared. I don't know.
yeah,
Because a big boat comes at them, and John's telling him, "Hey, they're friends. Hey, that's my friend Melissa skiing," and she's showing off. We all showed off, and she was really good, and she got him good.
It was like he was upset about being the butt of the joke, and I feel like with him, it was all about saving face. So
Yeah,
I could understand. I mean, I don't understand why he was upset, but, like, when you explained it like that, I was like, "Okay, I get that."
I don't know if he really figured out what the situation was, and when you're young kids, it's funny what you consider a compliment. You consider it a compliment for somebody to swamp you in the water,
Yeah.
and then rock your boat violently when the wake hits you.
yep,
Um, but they were grinning. We were all grinning, and at that age, I was, at 12, my parents let me take that ski boat out by myself and pull people around skiing. And I
Wow.
would never
wow.
do that myself. So we were all very, very adept at what we were doing with boats and stuff. But
Very good. Well, can you tell us a little bit about Louise Bundy? So, from everything we've read, she seemed like an incredibly sweet person who did love Ted dearly. So, I want your take on her. Tell us what we should know about Louise.
she did, she was the oldest of three sisters, and they all loved each other very much. My impression of Louise was always somebody who was extremely sweet and extremely nice. She was kind of like a little sister to my dad. And so he really adored her. And you could tell the affection between them as cousins, kind of like the affection that Ted and I had, that similar age difference.
Yeah.
So she was very nice. And Ted was her oldest child, and
Mhm.
by a father that to this day nobody knows who he is.
Wow.
Yeah. And after she met Johnny Bundy, not long, a year or so after they moved out, she had four more children.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, and Ted was always kind of different than they were. I mean, he was intellectual, really smart, and college bound and all that kind of stuff. These kids were more free spirited and just a little bit less into the things that he was into. He was so there was quite a bit of difference between the kids.
Jumping way ahead, do you think the fact that Ted didn't know his father, do you think that shaped him into the person he became?
So this is just me talking, but I think that is significant. My dad was a father figure to Ted, because he lived in our house, and my father was the father in that house for that year. My dad's just a sweetheart of a guy. I'm sure, they always had this wonderful relationship. Ted came through when we were in Arkansas. I was a senior in high school, the fall 1969. He made a special trip to head back to Philadelphia to try to see if he could somehow get into the records to find out who his father was. He
Wow.
really wanted to know. And I think that would have helped him if he could have found out, but he was not successful. And yeah, I agree.
Well, we brought this up in our talk last week about the fact that when you don't know where you came from, you feel like you don't have an identity, that you don't even know who you are. So I was always wondering if that shaped who he became, the monster he became.
And I think you hit on a really important point. I really do think that matters, or that
Mhm.
mattered a lot. I could be wrong, but
Mhm.
I'm almost positive that there's a lot of that's wrapped in there. His mother would never tell him where he came from. I can't help but speculate that on both sides, maybe anger at his mom, wanting to know who his father was. Maybe there's a reason why she didn't tell him.
Right.
Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, who knows what his meant, what his father's genetics were like?
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. That's I think often overlooked.
Yes.
Mhm.
We've often, as Megan and I wrote this back and forth, and we did months of research and trying to find some answers to some things. And we had a lot of discussions about this particular topic. So it's really
Mhm.
astute of you to bring it up.
Do you remember, like, when did he find out about his dad? Like, when did he realize he didn't know who his dad was?
I think it was a lot earlier on than what you see online.
Mhm.
Because we always knew, ever since I was little, I always knew that Johnny Bundy wasn't his father,
Mhm.
and that he was Louise's son. I mean, you see some things speculate that he was told that Louise was his sister or something, and
Yeah.
that never was ever anything that happened in front of us and with my dad. I mean, from the very beginning, she was always his mom. And so I don't know, you have a natural curiosity as you start growing up about things. So I don't know when he probably really started wondering.
So you guys moved, and I know he came to visit when you were in Arkansas.
Mhm.
And then when did you get close again? Was it, starting when you started college?
Yeah, I mean, we had a great when he came to Arkansas, he and I spent, a couple days together, and that was really the first time that we were more of adult, as a senior in
Mhm.
high school instead of one of the little kids. I mean, we started relating on more of the same level. And he was always sweet. It was his relationship with me was like I was just one of his favorite little sisters. I mean, he was always so sweet to me. Um, but it's when I went to 2 years of college at the University of Arkansas, which was absolutely great school. But then I couldn't wait to get back here to the Seattle area. So I transferred to the University of Washington to finish up my junior and senior year. I got an apartment right in the university district,
Mhm.
just a few blocks from Ted. And that's when we really started spending a lot of time together. And that was I moved in the fall of 72 and graduated in 74. 74 is when, from January through July of 74 is when young women started disappearing. Imagine my parents were so comforted knowing that he only lived a few blocks from me, 5 or 6 minutes away.
Isn't that so ironic?
It's so ironic.
Wow.
Yes.
Crazy. Well, you had mentioned in the book too about that he was sweet. He would stop by with groceries. He
Yes,
would
he
stop by and
was. He
chat.
did.
Like how long would you guys hang out? What would you talk about?
Oh wow, wow. So many things because Ted was a very interesting guy. He had done he was really involved in politics. He'd been to the Republican convention in Florida for I think the 68 or 69, whenever that convention was. And then he was working on a reelection campaign for a really popular we had a Republican governor, Dan Evans, that was running for reelection. He just passed away a couple months ago, I think 99 years old. I
Oh
mean,
my gosh.
Wow.
um, and so he was working on that reelection campaign there in the early 70s. And he would go undercover as a campaign aide into the opponent's camp and back then we had tape recorders. They were kind of big, but we were really excited because they had these smaller, you know, ones that were
They
only
were the
about
little
this
ones,
big.
yeah.
No, they were even bigger than that.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Cassette tape players.
Yes.
Um, so he would go into the enemy camp and he would pick up, little bits and pieces, and he would even go in
Wow.
disguise when he did that. And then he'd come back to the, Evans campaign headquarters, and they would, be thankful for all the stuff that he was doing. And that's when he first met and became really close to Dick Larson, who was the political reporter for the Seattle Times
Yeah.
at that time.
Wow.
So he had developed a lot of really close relationships. And he also worked on the Seattle Crime Commission during that time too. And even he wrote wrote stuff up on crime prevention and even
Yeah.
a pamphlet on rape prevention for women.
Incredible.
That blew me away when I read that in the book. I had to reread that like 3 times. I was just so blown away by that. And I was also just blown away that Ted Bundy brought you groceries. Like, I just so weird to think about.
There'd be a knock on my door, I'd open it up, and he would have a groceries and a bottle of wine, said, "Hey, do you mind if I drop by?" And I went, "Heck no."
You're a welcome guest.
And my roommates loved it. And then and he was so engaging that we all sort of were in awe of him because 5 years older, he was doing all these things. We were still scruffy college students with our long hair and bell bottoms and, and he was all kind of buttoned up. He was really buttoned up, with his preppy looking short hair, a cardigan.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he'd wear it draped over his shoulders and the sleeves tied around the front. And,
Mm-hmm.
That's so preppy.
so preppy. Yes.
Yeah.
You had said, Ted, when he did talk to you, that he was so focused and engaged and just
Very.
that you were the most important person in the room. So elaborate on that for me.
Yes. And that gives me the creeps in retrospect because he had a way about him that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, and that he would look you in the eye and talk to you and made you feel like you were important. And this was the rise of this was just the beginning of the women's movement, and so we really were starting to feel our oats. And so we loved it when there was a guy that was so super supportive, which he came across as. And my friends, we'd sit around him in a big circle, and we'd all kind of hang on his every word as he would tell us stuff, because he always had these stories of what he was doing. So yeah, we were pretty impressed with him.
With hindsight, do you feel that that personality that he was putting off, was that genuine? Because that's the same personality I feel like that he would use to lure his victims. He would charm them. He would
Yeah.
engage them. He would make them feel important, which is how he got what he wanted. So looking
Yes.
back, do you feel like that was the real Ted using his real personality to attack women? Or was that personality this fake one that he created to attack women? You know what I'm getting at?
I do. And again, another one of my theories, and Catherine Ramsland has talked about this. She's a psychologist, because he would wear a mask, and around his family and friends, he was one person, and around other people that he didn't know, he was probably a completely different person. But I think that charm and that ease and that what you felt like was genuine interest and yeah, he had a knack with him, and it just gives me the absolute chills to think that was his biggest weapon, and he used that
Yeah.
to disarm young women.
When was the first time you realized that something awful was going? I know it was 1974, but when something was happening to young women in the area.
So our apartment was right in the middle of some things that were starting to happen in the U district. And we started hearing rumors about women being attacked and something happening, or a stalker, something going on. And I worked at a restaurant as a server, to supplement my income.
The Pilgrim's Pantry.
Pilgrim's Pantry. We were all dressed in, Puritan outfits with low cut. Oh gosh, they were crazy. But anyway, food was pretty good actually. But we were all starting to get afraid to walk home at night after our
Mm.
shifts, even though we were more than a block away from where we were because of what we started hearing about. And the very first victim of Ted's was apparently just across the street and around the corner from me. And all Ted would have had to have done was walk from his rooming house, apartment what he had on the ground floor, past my front door and gone around the corner, and that's where his first victim was. Um, and so we didn't hear the specifics at first. We just knew something had happened. I wish the police had been more forthcoming in terms of the fact that it was just around the corner from us.
Right.
But we were terrified and really didn't know what was going on. And that was in January of 1974. And then at the beginning of February, another girl disappeared. And this one was about a 10-15 minute walk from where I lived, and actually was very close to where he lived when he hung out with his girlfriend Liz, near her
Hmm.
place.
You met Liz, right? Because you had gone over for dinner too. What did you think of Liz?
Oh, she was very nice. She was very nice. She was kind of a reticent personality, not very outgoing and very quiet. I thought she was completely different than what I would have envisioned that Ted would have hung out with.
Hmm.
So I was kind of surprised at that relationship, but she was very nice.
Hmm.
Um, she had a little girl,
Mhm.
so sometimes Ted would come pick me up or I would stop by there and then we would go off in his car, his VW,
Mhm.
and leave her behind. And I think, she would get a little miffed, but she couldn't go because she couldn't leave her little girl behind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you ever stay in touch with Liz after all this?
No, because we never
No.
became close. Um, but just to kind of wrap back around that second
Yeah, sorry
disappearance,
about that. Yeah.
well, that's okay because that person, Linda Ann Healy, was one of my roommates, one of my childhood friends' best friends.
Hmm. That was incredible to read, and your roommate had gone out to see her.
Yeah, I think that she had. Well, I thought that she had. I think my
Oh,
memory
okay.
was wrong.
Mhm.
But yeah, and to this day, my former roommate, and who's still a friend of mine, she can't even talk about it. It still upsets her so much that because of what happened to her. And then I always felt, oh my God, it was my cousin that did this to Linda. I mean, you can't. It's guilt by association. It was just, even though I knew that I had nothing to do with it,
Right.
it's still just thinking somebody that I was related to, but I had never introduced them. I finally figured that out, that they didn't connect through me, so I was grateful for that.
Yes.
Hmm.
Wow. So did you and your roommates take any precautions? Like did you walk in groups to class or
Yeah, we certainly did. We started, doing the buddy thing where we were afraid to go by ourselves. I remember sometimes, didn't have, I have to go to a class and there wasn't somebody going right at the exact same time I was. So I'd ride my bike just as fast as I could. I mean, we were afraid. We didn't know what was going on. There wasn't enough information, and we just started hearing rumors of these awful things beginning to happen. And it was almost like one every month.
Mhm.
It was like clockwork. Scary.
Yeah.
I thought the story about how John and Ted came over to put the lock on your door
Oh
was just
God.
why like I was just like, "Oh my goodness." Like that's
Yeah, my roommates weren't home yet. I had moved in with that roommate that whose friend was Linda Ann Healy's, and another friend of her. They used to be roommates with Linda Ann Healy. So we had moved
oh.
in, and my brother felt like our locks weren't sturdy enough, so he brought over, he went to the hardware store and he got some bolts to put on the door, barrel bolts, I think, or some other kind of locks. And
Wow.
he and Ted would often hang out together, and the two of them came over. Can you imagine what Ted must have been thinking?
God.
The monster was in the house. It
Yeah.
was like the barn door, I mean, it was too
Wow.
late to close it. He was there. Um,
Unreal.
yeah, it was, these thoughts, when you think back on it, you just go, oh my God, I can't even believe that. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
When the attacks were happening, did he ever have anything to say about the murdered and missing women? Like, did he ever make comments on it?
Oh, yeah, because it was such a scary thing that we
Mhm.
would bring it up. And he would just say, "Oh, I know. It's so awful. It's, just a terrible thing." He would just roll with it. He was so smooth, and we never suspected,
Wow.
that he was so successful at being who Ted was around family and friends versus what he was behind that mask.
Mhm.
Well, and speaking of that mask, one of the stories that stuck out to me was when you guys would go out dancing. He would come visit and you guys would go clubbing or dancing, whatever. You would notice he was kind of not focused or was focused, but on certain things. And it
Oh,
wasn't that he wasn't looking for a dancing partner. What was he looking
right.
for? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go out dancing with someone, and yeah, he was my cousin, so he was like a big brother. So, but he took me, just the two of us, to a pretty it was a hot spot at that time, down by a marina, beautiful place. And the place was crowded with lots of loud music and a lot of dancing. And so I'm into it, love to dance, but I couldn't get him to even look at me or to focus. He was
Wow.
just scanning back and forth across the room, just checking things out. And he looked really intense. He didn't look like he was having a good time at all.
Hmm.
Wow.
And I would wave my hand in front of his eyes, and because I thought, where is he? He's not even here. Hello, hello, are you there? And finally, he would sort of snap out it and look at me, and then all of a sudden, everything would light up for a few seconds, and then he would go right back into his, you know, predatory actions.
It was legitimately like he flipped a switch into like the hunter mode.
Yeah, and I did not realize, of
Wow.
course, that at the time.
Right.
Unreal.
I
Unreal.
couldn't understand why he was. Even some people that were strangers, that a couple that was dancing next to us took pity on me and said, "Why don't you just dance with us?" Which I did for a while. I danced with him because I thought, well, who wants to dance with him? He's just moving back and forth like this and
Yeah,
looking around.
man.
Yeah, it is like he flips a switch. And with that, another story you told was when he had smoked marijuana, and that was just why, like, it was totally two different people. Can you tell us about that?
It wasn't legal back then, so I'm admitting to something. But
Oh.
yeah, friends would drop by, and everybody, usually somebody would bring a couple joints, and they would light up, and we'd smoke. And he at first didn't want to. We were sitting around the living room and had some great music on, great company, bunch of people passing a joint around the group. And I went into the kitchen to get something for the group, like some beers or something like that. And he followed me in there. And he goes, I really don't want to smoke any of that. I said, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. I mean, I wasn't a person that ever pushed anything. But then when I came back in the living room, he had started smoking some of it, and he completely transformed. He was so locked up and in control all the time and buttoned up. It's the kind of the feel I get from him, where we were all loose. He was more, prim about things and kind of in control. But he was completely the opposite, Melissa.
Wow.
Um, he started getting just really wild, like as if you had gotten super drunk and you were just
Yeah.
out of control. He was just like that. He wasn't slurring his speech, but he was absolutely the opposite. He was like had taken speed or something. And then he actually got up on the coffee table, and which was real strongly made. It was a part of a ship's door that we had reconstructed. So it was plenty stout, but he was up there,
So cool.
and we were just so shocked that he was doing this. And everybody was just going kind of like,
Wow.
whoa, man, cool,
Yeah.
cool
And was
out.
that the first time you had seen him like that?
I'd never seen that part of him before.
Wow.
And when he realized kind of what he was doing, he kind of stepped down off of it and, sort of thought, oh God, I better get control. He did not want to be out of control. I think that
Mhm.
was kind of letting, he was losing control of a certain part of his personality right there.
And we took note of that when it came time for when the heat was on from the police, he
Yeah.
started to get a little sloppy, and you could feel that control. He didn't have it as much, and he started to you could see it in the way he acted and the way he killed, for lack of a better term.
You know, he was fighting the demons off for quite a while.
Mhm.
But when he was coming over to that house where that happened, all that was when already there had been several murders.
Man.
Wow.
He would often come to your apartment and you'd go places together, but you never really were allowed in his apartment. True?
No, that's right. And he always was dropping by my place. And so one time, because it was almost the direct route to the University of Washington campus, we call it the UW. And I would have to go like one block out of the way, but I could still go to the U campus and go by his place. So one time I decided on my way back to stop by and see him. And I knocked on the door and he opened the door, but only a little crack, and poked his head out. And I said, "Hey, Ted, thought I'd stop by and say hi." And I said, "Hey, can I come on in?" Because he always came in my place. So,
Yeah.
Right.
right. And he says, "No, now's not a good time." And I said, "Well, okay." I was really surprised. I said,
Yeah.
Mhm.
"That's okay. I don't care if it's not picked up. You know me. I mean, I'm sloppy students. Come on." He said, "No, no, I don't want you to see this."
Wow.
Hmm. What do you think in retrospect was didn't he want you to see?
Any number of things, Ed. My brother and I started putting our heads together after all these things started happening. And he didn't let my brother in there either, except one time my brother kind of saw in and he saw a bunch of stereo equipment, a whole bunch of stuff, not what you would just need for one person, and a bunch of nice skis.
Mhm.
There's a brand of skis called Head skis, and he had a couple of those. Those are expensive skis. And my brother thought, well, that's weird. How come he has all that stuff? But Ted distracted him and then he didn't think anything more about it after that. So
Wow.
one speculation is that he was ripping off some places. He was burglarizing, maybe. Or the other thing is, right at that time, who knows what was in his apartment? I mean,
Looking back, you probably wish he was stealing stereos
yeah,
and
that's right, because we don't want
Mhm.
to see any trophies or,
Yeah.
yeah.
oh God,
Uh,
just the thought of it gives me chills right now, just even thinking. I'm glad I didn't go in that apartment now.
Yeah. Why did he work at the emergency, like the suicide hotline? Like that is just so strange. Like, and Anne Rule even said, I believe in The Stranger Beside Me, and she says, he took lives, but he saved lives, and it's just such a weird thing.
Yeah, he probably saved several lives by doing that.
Yeah.
Perhaps he was trying to compensate
hmm.
for, you know, whatever was going on in his
Yeah.
Hmm.
mind.
That's always been something that's stuck out to me about him, and it's just so strange.
Oh, I
Hmm.
agree, Melissa.
Hmm.
I just think that it's really weird too, and interesting,
Mhm.
Yeah.
that he
Wow.
could be doing good works. I mean, that's one of the things that I mourned was the person he could have been.
Yes.
Mhm.
He squandered all these good things that he was doing. He was doing a lot of good things, but those didn't tip the scale versus the evil that
Right.
he was doing, which eventually took over.
That leads me into the next question. So the Lake Sammamish murders is kind of when the Ted murders were coined, and that phrase started being thrown around the media. And I'm wondering when you started to hear this, you obviously never suspected him in anything before that. So now the Ted murders come and there's little descriptions happening and there's like a VW bug and there's all these little things. Did you give him the benefit of the doubt at the time?
Well, we thought it was such a strange coincidence because reports started coming. Two young women disappeared in the same day out at a really popular beach on a lake east of Seattle. So it probably was a
Wow.
20-minute drive on Lake Sammamish, and two in one day. But he was getting sloppy because
Hmm.
he was introducing him. Whoever it was said their name was Ted.
That blows my mind because for how
Yeah.
careful and calculated he was, that why give your real name?
I don't know.
Hmm.
He put on a fake cast so he would get people,
Hmm.
the nicest people, or who he chose as victims, people who wanted to give him help.
Yeah.
And there are some witnesses that saw him walking towards this tan, beige, whatever the color of it, VW bug was. So so we saw these newspaper reports. We started hearing, news clips that would come out. We were getting the paper. They started putting composite pictures. Somebody hit the witnesses, and they didn't look like Ted. So we didn't. We went,
Hmm.
well, it doesn't look like our Ted.
Hmm.
But we thought that is so weird, and we started asking ourselves lots of questions about that, and thought, well, we should probably ask him about that.
And how'd
Wow.
that go?
So he came over one time, another one, he just dropped by, and my boyfriend at the time, which is now my husband, Don, was over. He had driven up he lived in Tacoma, he was working in a lumber mill at the time.
Wow.
He was a big, strong dude, in the Marine Corps. So when he was
Wow.
not in the Corps, he was doing that. So we had the paper with a composite picture on it. I think it was either the Seattle Times or the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. And Ted was there. Ted pulled up in his VW bug right in front of our house,
Wow.
and came in. And Don had, picked up the paper and kind of thrust it in his face and said, you know, looks just like you, Ted. Ha 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 ha. And Ted just laughed it off. He just absolutely rolled with it. Didn't even act like it was any big deal. He says, "Oh, I know. It's just been crazy. I can't even believe it." And in fact, the police have interviewed me, and we were so shocked and felt so sorry for him that he
Hmm.
was even being, drawn into this. And he
Hmm.
goes, "No, no, I want to help. I want to help." And
Wow.
and then he gave us a statistic that said, of there's 400 Ted Bundy or Teds. That's what it was. 400 Teds in the state of Washington that have VW bugs. Now he inflated the number
Yes.
Hmm.
by quite a bit.
Yeah.
Now remember, back then there was so many VW bugs,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
so many of them.
Wow.
They were
So
everywhere.
then I guess a lot of years passed between kind of those accusations, and then he had moved. He had moved to Utah, to Florida. He'd been
Right
all
after
over the place. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Utah.
talk to me about those years. So before we get the news, the big news, talk to me about those kind of intervening years.
It wasn't very long. So he moved right after that. That was mid July of 1974 when the two young women disappeared from Lake Sammamish.
Hmm.
He was accepted at the University of Utah Law School. I don't know if he started right then, but he moved to Utah then. And so he was gone by August or September of that same year. And murder stopped. The disappearances
Mhm.
stopped. We never made the connection.
Right.
So you have to understand, back then we did not have social media. There was no way that
Right.
police departments didn't communicate with other jurisdictions. There were
Hmm.
news articles and stories didn't necessarily get picked up in other states. So for a long, girls started disappearing in Utah. But those stories and those comparisons and the police weren't picking up yet on that for quite a while.
Sure.
That's
And
crazy.
it took a little while for that to happen.
So jumping ahead a little bit, can you tell us about when you got the news? I know you were on the boat, which Wow, I can't believe you did that. Especially, what did you think that there were like, it started with like 200 people, and by the time you were done, there were like 12 of you left or something. I was like, she's such a badass. That's so cool.
So what boat? Because Melissa, not everyone read the book. So
Oh,
what boat
sorry.
are you talking? Edna,
So,
what boat were you on? And
yeah,
then
so this was, if you look back at the times, Jimmy Carter, I mean, when you look at the times back then, this was hyperinflation, no jobs. Here I was,
Mm.
graduated out of college, and you couldn't find work. So my three of my friends and I got this crazy idea that we would go and work up in a Alaska king crab processing ship up in the Aleutian Islands, 1,200 miles off the coast of Alaska. You
man,
could
how
see
cool.
Russia from there. So
Wow, that's
I'm
wild.
exaggerating, but we weren't too far from Russia. Um, and we were on a ship. It was moored in Dutch Harbor, and
Hmm.
I was on a ship and working in the processing plant, packing crab, and
Wow.
it and I got someone came and told me I had a ship to shore call. And so I had to go up to the bridge to take the call on a radio phone.
Were those common? So when you would get a ship to shore call, did that always mean it was something important?
Well, yeah, who would call you up in
Right.
a way
Right.
out in the middle of nowhere? And it was not an easy thing to do for the caller to get through and figure out how to get to us. And so this is the captain had to, actually, it was the plant manager because the ship wasn't going anywhere, but it was on in the bridge. He had to show me, you had to click on and then you talk and you have to click off and let the other person talk. So we were on any other ship who's on that same frequency could have overheard our conversation too.
Oh my goodness. I never even thought about that. That's
Yeah. So I get this call from my brother, and of course my first thought is, oh my God, something's happened to my mom and dad.
Mhm.
What do you
uh-huh.
this the only reason why somebody would call me up there is not just to shoot the breeze.
Mhm.
And that's when my brother told me. He said, Ted's been arrested for the disappearance and possibly the murder of young women. Was in Utah, and I just completely freaked out
Yeah.
because the thought of that, just, I didn't want it to be true, and if it were true, it was just too horrible to even process.
Mhm.
Wow. So when you did hear the news, yeah, I mean, did you believe it right away, or was it the culmination of like all these rumors coming to a head?
Well, you know what you do? You're in denial. You
Yeah.
think you know someone.
Mhm.
And my brother and I talked about, we thought it must be just the wrong place at the wrong time, that if the
Mhm.
car's the same, that must be just a terrible mistake. And that's what
Wow.
we were clinging to and hoping that was the case.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
Did he write you from any prison that he was in? Because then he ended up in Florida too.
Yeah. I, I wrote to him,
Mhm.
and he wrote back, and my parents, all of us rallied. My family
Mhm.
rallied, his family, we all rallied. Even the governor of our state, Governor Evans, had written him a
Wow.
recommendation for law school. I mean, so
Mhm.
many people thought this couldn't be.
Mhm.
Professors, just people whose classes he attended, places where he worked. The reporter for the Seattle Times, he didn't even believe it. And an investigative, incredible reporter,
Man.
Richard Larson. I mean, he was, one of the best. Um, None of us could accept this at first. You just don't. If it's somebody you know, I mean, you can't. You How do you cross that line to believing someone you cared about that much and thought you really knew could be responsible for these things? So it had to be a mistake.
Sure. How did you and your immediate family handle the news? Because I've seen cases where something like this happens, and there's a divide in the family where some people will think he's innocent, some will think he's guilty. There's been divorces over it. There's been
Right.
siblings who don't talk to other siblings. So how did your family, the Cowell family, handle the news?
Well, this was right at the very beginning. So when you're right at the very beginning, we're all united. We all think this has been a terrible mistake because we don't have a lot of information. We don't know anything yet. And and he's reassuring everybody, saying, "Hey, it's a big mistake.
Hmm.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
I'm going to get this taken care of." So we're all rallying for him at the very beginning, and that's where we are at that point.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But then he's arrested in Florida. Then he escapes. He's on the run. So that whole thing must have been a sign in your mind. Like, if he's escaping from prison and doing all these things,
Oh
was
yeah.
that the moment that you were like, man, he's not telling us the truth?
Uh, I actually had a moment before that. Um, I get back from Alaska. So this is in December. So I've been up there for an
Mm.
entire crab processing season, which is like 3 or 4 months. And one of the most important things I want to do is because he's out on bail
Hmm.
from
Yeah.
Utah. His parents came up with a bail, and family members chipped in. His bail was reduced down to, I think from $150,000, which is a lot of money back then, to
Wow.
15,000 or something like that. And all you have to put up is 10%.
Hmm.
So family members chipped in to help Louise pay for bail. So he was out on bail, and he was home in Seattle. He was in Seattle, and he was at his girlfriend Liz's house. And so I get
Wow.
out on bail. I get out on bail. It was like I was in
Whoa,
prison.
whoa, whoa! Because those joints you were passing around.
That was all that, and it was being up there, and oh god, I felt like I was in prison. It was hard work, 12 hour,
Yes.
12 hours
Wow.
a day, 30 days, no time off. But anyway, I get home, and one of the first things I want to do is talk to him,
Mhm.
and that's I had a confrontation with him that made me realize that everything I hoped and prayed about him was I
Mhm.
was wrong.
No, you probably start thinking back to all of those moments that, like,
Yeah.
wow, this wasn't what it was. That wasn't what it was, and just mind-boggling.
You start looking back, there weren't a lot of signs because he was so good at controlling them. But
Hmm.
there were
Yeah.
several little things that I started thinking about. Oh God, maybe like that dancing scene. That that explains that. And then
Hmm.
dancing on the table that explains that. So there were a lot of things that you started thinking about. But then you had to think, well, gosh, how could somebody like that be so upright and responsible and
Yeah.
charming and likable and do all that. How could that person be so two completely different people?
Unreal. Well, then, so eventually the trial rolls around. He's tried. He's arrested. He's tried, and you were asked to attend the trial, correct? But you chose not to.
When it got close to the time that he was going to be executed, um, everybody was trying to get Ted to come, quit lying, basically, and let families know who his victims were. And even to this day, there's still some victims of young women that he murdered where their families don't know where their remains are. They don't know where
Mhm.
he left them. And that was something that really, really got to me too. In fact, I wrote letters to him in prison just telling him, come on, you got to do the right thing. You're going
The
to
least you
die.
can
Mhm.
do, right?
You're going to die. You have been, you've gotten the death penalty. This is the time to do something, at least this small act of goodness, and to let the families know where their loved ones where you left their loved ones.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so Richard Larson thought maybe I would, because he knew what affection Ted had for me. He thought maybe if I went down to Florida, where he was imprisoned, that he might talk to me and tell me
Hmm.
Mhm.
some of these things. But Richard hadn't seen those letters that Ted had written to me, where Ted completely put me down and patronized me in the letters and said, you need to get to know yourself better. Once you know yourself, you can know me, and you need to love yourself. And gave me all kinds of. I knew that he wasn't ever going to.
Yeah. Wasn't he like, love? I love you for what you are, so love me for who I am. I think
Yes.
that's quite a tall task.
And he says, the past is the past.
Oh,
And I'm going, yeah, well, we're all sum totals of our past. We have to
Yeah.
own up to our past.
wow.
That's part of the reason why I wrote the book, because I've been hiding all this. I realized I needed to get that. Trauma should not be. You need to let things out, and this is
Yeah.
why I wrote the book. And he gave me a lot of trauma about that. In that letter about just the past is the past. I was so angry about that
Wow.
he would give me that line of crap, you know, that I knew that he would not drop the mask in front of me. He put family and friends in a different spot, and he would never reveal this kind of horrific thing to his family and friends.
Yeah.
So then I guess the big question is, why do you think then, right before his execution, did he decide to finally come clean about, and whether or not he came clean about everything, I doubt it personally, but he came clean about a lot.
We've talked a lot about that, and I truly think that he held out as long as he could to see if he could somehow get, um, another mistrial, or
Mm-hmm.
just a continuance of some kind, um, because and then at the very end he realized that he had run out of all his options.
Mhm.
The
Oh.
very interesting thing is that I just recently was contacted by one of his attorneys,
Hmm.
and who was in one of his writ of habeas corpus, um, where you try to get a mistrial.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And I have all the transcripts from that, and they're incredibly interesting.
Wow.
And he really held out to the last minute because he thought maybe he might have hope
Mhm.
of getting a new trial. And there were a lot of things that went on in his trial that would not be allowed normally. I mean, there there were some very questionable things that were overlooked that really weren't right in terms of what should have taken place in a trial. But the bottom line is the guy was guilty. But
Mm-hmm.
um, there was stuff that was used as evidence that anybody would go, well, God, they used that, I mean, so there's lots of interesting things looking on the inside and
Hmm.
seeing these transcripts that gave me a different perspective.
Hmm.
But still, I think he held out to the very end with hope. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Like, I would not, knowing what I know about him, I'm surprised that he did. I thought he would take. He took it. I mean, he held those secrets in a lockbox for years. That
yeah,
I'm
he sure
surprised
did.
he did. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, he waited till the very end, but at least he gave some information. Whether there's
Mhm.
more than what he gave, I don't know.
Mhm.
This is super random, but do you ever, when you see like something on TV, like a commercial for whatever channel is showing a documentary on Ted Bundy, have you ever watched any of them or read like Anne Rule's book or watched the one with the shockingly wicked, vile, and cruel? I don't remember the name of it. Do you ever watch those? Like, that would be so weird.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Up until writing this book, I had never watched any of those or read any
Okay.
of those books. But because we were doing this book and we needed to do our due diligence, and I majored in history, so I understand, the importance of doing your homework and making sure that you do your fact checking. So
Mm-hmm.
I read Anne Rule's book. I read.
Oh, okay.
I also read Richard Larson's book, which was The Deliberate Stranger, and he was made into a movie by Mark Harmon.
Mm-hmm.
And I also and Richard Larson and I became really good friends. And then I also read the book that was written by Robert Keppel, who was the chief detective on Ted's case here in
Mhm.
the Seattle area.
Wow.
Hmm.
And those were my three main sources because, from three different perspectives, they gave me really what I needed. And then I watched all those shows,
Hmm.
but I could
Yeah.
only watch them when I got up in the morning. If I couldn't watch them later in the day.
Hmm.
Mm.
And it was very disturbing to watch those because I had to face up to some horrific things about what he did that I
Yeah.
just didn't want to know, but I had to.
Do you ever consider yourself lucky? Because it didn't seem to me like he killed anyone he really knew. But did you ever wonder, maybe if I said the wrong thing or if I put him in the wrong situation, did you ever feel in danger looking back?
I don't think he would have crossed over and ever attacked people that he cared about. But when I was alone with him in the car, that's when I came to realize that he had done it.
Hmm.
And then I was pretty concerned. I would say
Wow,
that.
I'll
Yeah.
bet. I'll
Yes.
bet.
Wow.
After Ted's execution, how did your life change? I mean, not all of us can say that we've had a family member put to death by the state. So was that a weight off your shoulder? Was that a weight off your shoulder for the victims?
Yeah, I hope that it was that the families that it was a positive thing, but I don't think you can ever fill that void from having lost your daughter, your cousin, your
Yeah.
friend, your sister. You know, I had really mixed feelings because I don't believe in capital punishment for various reasons, but I
Hmm.
can understand why somebody would.
Hmm.
And if all people who deserved it, I think, yeah, I can see why you would think that. But I wish that he hadn't been put to death because I think that we could have gotten some more answers.
I was just gonna ask that. Like, I often wonder if we hadn't put him to death, what else would we have found out? Or why wasn't his brain studied? I
I
mean, did we
know.
not know to do that back in the late
I
80s?
guess
Like,
not.
you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think that maybe we might have found out more about some of where his victims were,
Yeah.
maybe more about personality disorder that he had.
Hmm.
That's why I just think, but they were just very determined to put him to death in Florida. And so many people wanted him to die,
Right.
and I understand that, but I think we would have found out. I how we don't know what we don't know. What we could have found
Yeah.
out if he hadn't been.
I think I wonder that a lot. So where is Ted now? Did Louise have his ashes?
I think she probably did,
Okay.
Hmm.
but I
Wow.
couldn't tell you for sure.
Hmm.
And she
Yeah.
passed away in 2012.
Yeah, she passed away a little over 10 years ago. Yes.
How
Yeah.
did her other kids do
Oh,
after all this came out?
I can't speak for them, but
Yeah.
I can imagine that it messed up their lives in so many different profound ways. How could it not? If
Oh,
it
of
was so
course.
hard on us, we're more ancillary, we're cousins, although he and I spent a lot of time together and we're close.
Mhm.
And he and my brother were close. He wasn't our sibling.
Mhm.
I know that
Right.
his youngest sibling, his brother, I think it really affected him very profoundly.
I'm
He really
sure.
looked up to his big brother, and to find out that somebody you looked up to like that was such a horrific monster. Yeah.
Wow.
The one thing before we wrap up that we just didn't find a good place to ask it was about Carol, and Rose. Is it Rosa or Rose? Like
Yeah.
that's a very interesting kind of side story that goes on, and I'm curious if anybody has a relationship with his daughter at all.
She and I get this. She's gone underground,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and I don't blame her at all.
Hmm.
And I hope that she can stay off the grid as long as possible, and whatever she needs to do to stay out
Hmm.
of focus, you know.
Hmm.
And Carol, I don't get Carol at all. How
No.
I just do not understand that. There's a whole group of people that idolize people like this.
Hmm.
I don't
Yeah.
understand it. I mean, she got to know him, I think, when down in our capital, Olympia, capital of our state, which is where she worked, and I think that's where she got to meet him. But I don't understand how she
Yeah,
you know stuck with
Yeah.
him, ended up marrying him. I don't understand all of that.
I don't either.
It's a mystery to me.
Yeah.
The Ted that you knew and the Ted you grew up with and that Ted that visited you, never in a million years did you see this in him. to learn what he was responsible for, the heinous things that he did, that wasn't the Ted you knew.
No, it was not.
Hmm.
No, he was a very important part of our family. Very well loved and very well admired. We all
Mhm.
admired him and we're proud of him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's probably only a handful of people on earth that can say they have a serial killer in the family, especially one so infamous. So what does that feel like? I imagine it's quite a range of emotions from betrayal to
Yeah, betrayal is a good word for, I it was such a shock to find out. We felt absolutely devastated when we came to terms with the fact that he did it. And once we saw the evidence, we realized that he was this murderer. It was really terrible to realize that this was a person who moved freely amongst us and amongst my friends who I exposed them to him. And it was something I didn't want to talk about for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And even my own daughter, I didn't even talk about it to her. She was so shocked when we went out for a walk right when COVID started, and we walked a lot. We've always walked a lot together. And I said, I think I need to get Ted out of my system. And she stopped in her tracks. She couldn't believe I even said his name. So that shows you how much I bottled it up and didn't let it
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
out.
Now that you've had so many years to reflect, what would you say to Ted? Because I imagine your emotions now are different than they were when you were in the thick of this.
Well, I would use some pretty vile language actually that I
Hmm.
cannot repeat here, but I would talk to him. I would tell him what I thought of him, that
Yeah.
I can't even say what comes to my mind, but I would want to see if I could get him to do something for the families. They've always been on my mind ever since I was writing these letters to him back in the 80s. Um, and to explain what it was that was going on, how everybody wants to always know why somebody did what they did.
Edna, I think one thing you said earlier really stuck with me when you said you mourned what he could have been. And I think that's so true. And Ed and I just talked about this when we covered him in our last episode. I said at the end about the judge. The judge was like,
Yeah,
basically, you could have been so much, and it
right,
sucks that you're not. And I felt like the judge, maybe, I do feel like he should have been a little bit harsher, maybe,
right.
like what he said. But
But it was true.
yeah, and I genuinely feel like the judge was so upset that this brilliant mind
Yeah,
was just so wasted.
so wasted, so squandered. He
Yeah.
could have gone so many different directions. And why did he go this direction? What was it that was happening in his brain that made him so angry, um, that he had to take that out on young women? What happened?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what happened? Yeah.
Mhm.
We pegged him as a politician that he would have stayed in politics.
Well, he was a narcissist, and that's
Yeah,
politics.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think to the nth degree.
Wow.
So what's next for you, Edna?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, this has been consuming me, to such a degree. I've been so busy in my career in sales for years, and then at the end of it, I started working on this book, and it's been the last several years that we've been working on this. So it's actually we're still um, there's still a lot of things going on with it, and we're talking to some people that may want to do more with it. Maybe, you know, make
Awesome.
it
That's
into some
amazing.
kind of a docu series or something. We'll see.
Very cool.
You
Very
never know
cool.
with this stuff, but
It's
it's
true.
you just can't count on it. But it's fun to think about,
Hmm.
and kind of scary. I mean,
That's a big deal. You're opening a big can of worms.
yeah, it
Hmm.
is. It is. So I have very mixed feelings about it. But I chose to do this.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
consequently, I mean, one of the good things that has come out of it is that I've heard from a lot of people who've been through a lot of trauma, and they have thanked me for telling the story. And then they've told me things that they've never told anybody else, and which is really the first step, is
Hmm.
really to start talking about it and not keep that stuff bottled up, which I shouldn't have done that for 50 years, which I'm now
Mhm.
discovering. It's really helpful to talk about it.
Good. Good. So, Edna, where can this book was incredible. Dark Tide gripping. There it is. Got it. Where can people find it?
So it's at all the booksellers. You can get it at Amazon, of course, Barnes and Noble, lots of different websites. It's on Audible, Kindle, just all the major places. It's available.
Great. Well, we definitely recommend checking it out. It was we couldn't put it down. It was
It's
Oh,
great.
phenomenal.
Yeah. And Edna, seriously, thank you so so much for giving us your time today
ah,
and sharing this story with us. You're the
yeah.
best.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Anytime, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Okay, sounds great.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks.
All right. Bye bye.
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 Man, how cool was that?
She was so sweet.
She was.
This is wild. We just finished an interview with Ted Bundy's cousin. What?
What? I know, right? I'm happy that she's finally agreed to kind of tell her side of the story. It was such a unique perspective that it sounds like it healed her as well to help get these things off of her mind and come out of hiding.
And you know what I respect like the most about her is that, and she said this to us at the beginning. I don't know if we were recording yet, but just about you have to have a little bit of humor.
It's such sad subject matter that if you don't laugh, you will. I mean, if you really sit there and ruminate on all of the stuff that is happening in these stories,
Mhm.
so sad, so tragic.
It
Well,
is.
well, that was our week and our block on our little mini block on Ted Bundy. And next week we're going to dive into another heavy hitter, John Wayne Gacy.
Ugh.
I know, and the reason is because we have an interview with a forensic psychologist who actually interviewed him. I think it's something like 20 hours on
Yeah.
death row, Dr. Jeffrey Smalden, who also authored a book. So that's what we have coming up.
Yeah, that'll be coming out. John Wayne Gacy's will come out the third week in January, and our interview with Dr. Smalden will be the last week in January.
That's right.
But in the meantime, everybody needs to go out and buy Edna's book because it's
Yep.
so good. I finished it in like a night. I couldn't put it down.
It was record time. You were telling me things I hadn't read yet. I was like, don't way to
I
spoil it.
literally laughed out loud at some parts and I got choked up and cried at other parts. It was amazing. And even without talking about Ted Bundy, she has lived such an amazing life. It's just worth reading to just hear about that.
Check it out.
So we will actually link the book so you can go get it. Like Edna said, it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kindle, Audible.
I
But
didn't say
again,
that.
I said Edna.
Oh, I get confused. Our names are very similar.
Oh boy. Anyway, we will link that. So if you're interested, you can check it out on our Facebook, Insta, TikTok at Murder Unscripted. Or you can shoot us an email, murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com. Or you can even send us a message through our website,
With all these options,
www.murderunscriptedpod.com.
man.
And if you do buy the book and read it, please email us because I have so much to say.
Melissa needs someone to talk to about this other than me because I'm tired of hearing it.
It's true.
I'm like, Melissa, we're going to talk to Edna next week. I know you're excited.
So excited.
Oh, man.
Well, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it as always. And please, if you don't mind taking a minute or two out of your day to rate, like, subscribe, all of the above, we would so appreciate it.
We would.
And as we always like to remind you, and actually, this is a big reminder because if anybody embodies this phrase, it's Ted Bundy. Perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
Sometimes they wear little sweaters over their shoulders.
Preppy.
Yep.
Bye.